My guest for this episode is legendary high-stakes PLO pro and poker coach Phil Galfond. We talked about his new poker site, BetRivers Poker, being married to fellow poker pro Farah Galfond, and his legendary comeback in the Galfond Challenge against VeniVidi. Let's get into it. All right, well, Phil, thank you so much for doing this, especially for inviting us into your home in Las Vegas. This is going to be a fun one. As I was mentioning, the very first episode of this podcast was with your wife, Farah Galfond, so it's really cool to have this come full circle. So yeah, thanks so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure, and actually you saved me some time, so I appreciate you being here too.
Well, yeah, we're happy to make the trip. I'm actually pretty close to here, and I play at South Point a lot, so let's get into it. There's a bunch of recent things that I want to talk about. The launch of BetRivers. You had a documentary come out about 5 months ago that talked about a lot of aspects of your life, but let's go back even further to the beginning, when you were growing up in Maryland, and you're one of the original online poker grinders, one of the first young players to find success in the online world. So take us back to Maryland. When did you first discover poker?
So when I discovered poker, growing up, I played card games with friends that technically poker, I barely call it poker, starting around 12, 13. And really through middle school and high school, it's like the main social activity we did was get together at somebody's house and play cards. But there was no strategy to it. None of us knew what we were doing. I wasn't, I was probably better than average, but not special in any way. And that was kind of it. I just liked to gamble. And then it was when I was in college in Wisconsin, I went to UW-Madison. One of my friends from back home won a tournament on Party Poker for $30,000 or something. And so it became the talk of, all of us. And he actually reached out to me individually and said, Phil, I've been reading poker books and actually studying, and I think you'd be really good at this if you put some effort in. And that's all it took. I was happy to try it out. And yeah, that started it. I picked up a couple of books, one being Hold'em Poker for Advanced Players by Slansky, and that led me to the 2+2 forums, and I started playing sit and goes, and yeah, that started it all.
And you mentioned one of your friends who kind of got you more into that. Another close friend in poker you have is Andrew Robl. How did you meet him, and when did you both realize that, you two were the standout players of the group, perhaps?
So our group had a lot of standout players, and so I met Andrew on the 2+2 sit and go forums, and I met him in person. I was 19 or 20. I know I was underage. There was like a sit and go forum meetup and heads up sit and go bracket style tournament that we did. It was a small amount of money, but it was for fun. And I met him there the first time. I talked to him online a lot. And then it was my first summer in Vegas when I was 21. He was actually underage still, where I lived in a house with a handful of guys, and he was one of them. And really, everybody was kind of on par with each other. And even the year following that, I lived in a house with those guys plus another half dozen. So it was probably, like 12, 13 guys in a kind of a compound. And that second summer, I was one of a few who were playing higher stakes. I just started the, 100, 200, 200, 400 full tilt games. But even the summer prior to that, I was playing 510. So it didn't really feel like there were standouts. Nobody really separated themselves. Andrew was always really good, and he was a grinder. He worked really, I don't just mean that he put in a lot of hours playing, but he just worked really hard. And that's something that I kind of always saw in him that made him stand out from everybody else.
And we'll probably talk about this more later on, but you two have kind of had similar trajectories in life where you started families at the same time. And I remember talking to Farah, she said that your families are still very close. And so what's it like having your close friends follow that same kind of life trajectory?
It's fun. We have a few couples here in Vegas that we spend a lot of time with, and we've all got kids, not all the same age, but my son is about to turn 6, and he's one of the older of the group, but everybody, 0 through 6 for the most part. And I don't know, it's interesting because especially with somebody like Andrew, some of the other ones, guys like Jason Koon, who I've known since 2012 or so. but Andrew, all the way back to 2005, or earlier. Yeah, it's just cool to have like remember our lives back then and kind of see us all grown up together. But it's, I mean, yeah, it's just like we talk less and less about poker and more about being dads, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. So sticking with those early online days, were you playing Hold'em back then? When did you start playing Pot-Limit Omaha?
So I started with No Limit Hold'em Sit and Goes. That was about a year and a half before I switched to No Limit Hold'em Cash Games. I'm not going to get the timeline perfect, but it was around, I think, 2008, 2009, which was after a few years of No Limit Cash only, that I started also playing PLO. So I played both. And really the reason for that was the games. It's weird to think about now because people who play online now or look at online games now, it was much different. But when I started playing No Limit, like Nosebleed No Limit Cash, like you could get a 200, 400 No Limit game, like six-handed, like very, very frequently in multiple tables running. And that started to dry up a little bit, and it was happening at PLO. And so I just followed the action over to PLO. It wasn't a really conscious decision. It actually kind of happened. I didn't actually play this night, but one night, I want to say that we were at WPT Niagara. So it was a trip with a bunch of the guys that I lived with in Vegas over the summer. And there were these really good PLO games running, and Tom Dwan was playing them. And he just said, Phil, these games are really good. You should get in them. And I was like, Tom, I don't play PLO. Like, I'd never played a hand of PLO. He's like, no, trust me. They're like really good. You should get in. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not gonna sit at 200, 400 PLO, 4 tables. And he's like, all right, well, do you want to learn? I said, yeah. And he's like, okay, watch me play. And so I didn't hop into the games, but I did watch him play. And then, yeah, soon after that, I don't even know how much I learned from watching him play with no kind of prior context to PLO, but kind of sparked the journey. And then from there, I learned primarily at first from Card Runners videos, Brian Hastings especially, and Brian Townsend a little bit. And yeah, just started playing.
So you mentioned Brian Hastings. Who would you say are some of the top Pot-Limit Omaha players?
Today, most of the top players are screen names. I mean, I guess people know a lot of them are, but a couple of the top online players, Barry Sweet and Am So Good, people don't know their identities. I happen to know their first names, but that's they're not out there. Sanita is another one who's a big online guy. I mean, Linus Love, who everybody knows, plays well. And if we go back a few years, guys like Ben Tollerine were top of the food chain. I don't know how much he plays these days. Who else comes on? I'm sure I'm forgetting a ton of people, but there are a lot of great PLO players, and depending on kind of what year we want to look back at.
So back then, so you mentioned the Card Runner videos. It must have been an interesting time because even for No Limit Hold'em, I bet there was not a lot of strategy. And for something like Pot-Limit Omaha, there was probably hardly anything. So you mentioned the Brian Hastings, but yeah, was it a difficult game to learn back then?
Compared to now, well, there was much less information, but everybody had much less information. And so for me, I was a lot more comfortable in that setting. I'm somebody who enjoys figuring it out. I don't enjoy studying like in the traditional way and like trying to memorize things and drilling and things like that. So I really loved learning in that environment, and I was able to catch up quickly in that environment where people didn't have, years of studying solver outputs ahead of me. But so yeah, I mostly learned from videos, and I would say the biggest kind of hack to learning was studying with friends. But studying with friends first and videos second. And yeah, we were figuring it out as we went. There were some books. There were like 1 or 2 books on PLO, a bunch of books on No Limit Hold'em. and you'd get kind of a basic strategy down, and then you just kind of figure it out as you go.
And so you really climbed up the ranks over those years. In 2008, I think it was, was it your best year, an $8 million year? Yeah. Talk about, how did that come together?
So 2007, 8, 9, the games were huge on Full Tilt. They were running regularly. And it's not necessarily that I played better in 2008 than the other years, but I just ran better. There were a ton of, $500, $1,000 blind, Miller Hold'em and PLO games and half games. And that's 100K buy-in. And so, I mean, 8 million is a lot of money, but obviously it's a lot of money, but in terms of buy-ins, it's not like an insane year, because I was mostly playing 200, 400, 300, 600, a lot of 500, 1K. So really a lot of it was variance, truth be told, although I was a favorite in those games. But lots of guys were as good as I was and, didn't have that big of a year. What my biggest memory from that year was high stakes, I think it was high stakes DB. They had leaderboards. They tracked all the hands on Full Tilt. And that year, for most of the year, I was like neck and neck with Phil Ivey for the most winnings on Full Tilt. And at the end, he had me beat by like $1 million, or I don't remember exactly. But it was funny because I soon after that was with him in person, and I referenced it. He had no idea what I was talking about, obviously.
That's a good Phil Ivey story.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
So another fun story from, I think it was those early online days, maybe a little later on, was you had 2 New York City penthouses, and you had like a slide installed so you could get between the 2 of them. Is this a true story?
It is true. And actually it's kind of, I don't know if serendipitous is the right way to put it, but that year I had, I decided, I think the very beginning of 2008 to buy those units and combine them. And I was expecting to, put down a deposit of 20% and get a loan. And then 2008 was the mortgage crisis, and nobody would lend me money. And so like I was trying to figure out how I had to put, I don't remember if it was like a 15% deposit on the condos that I was going to lose if I couldn't come up with all the money. And I had to stretch. So basically, it was really fortunate that I ran very hot that year, so I could afford to move in. And then, as far as the slide, I don't know. I just thought, why not? I was visiting. I was, with a realtor looking at a lot of different units, and I really liked this building that we found, but they didn't have a unit as big as I wanted. And he said, "Oh, well, these 2 are available on top of each other, and you could combine them with a staircase." And as we were, as we went to look at it, I was like, "Oh, we could just put a slide." Like it was kind of a joke. But as soon as I said it, and I was there with a friend who was going to room with me. We just thought, why not?
Do you know if it's still there? Do you know if the new owners kept that in there?
So when I sold it in, I want to say 2012, after I moved out of the country, I sold it to somebody who said they were going to remove it. But I know 2 years after that, I had visited New York, and it was still there. You could see it from the street. So as of 2014, it was there. I haven't checked on it since.
All right. Well, that's interesting. We'll have to see if it's still there. So one thing that I like asking online players from back in the day is, of course, about Black Friday. You're probably one of the best people to ask about this, because I know in the documentary about you, it talked a lot about how you were kind of somebody who people went to during this period and asked, like, hey, what's the future of online poker? What's the environment like? So talk about how Black Friday impacted you personally, and how, I don't know, you kind of became an ambassador for poker in that time.
Black Friday was, first there was a massive shift in the availability of games. So before Black Friday, I was playing nosebleed stakes on Full Tilt. A lot of those games were triple draw games. It was 2K, 4K triple draw. And then once, post Black Friday, at least for a long time, it was just Poker Stars and the biggest games. There were some 200, 400 PLO games, but mostly like 51, 100, 200. And so the stakes dropped. It wasn't like I was one of the fortunate ones. I had I had nothing really tying me anywhere, so I could pick up and move. And I went with some friends to Vancouver and continued. And to be honest, it was a really good thing for my poker career because I had gone from, I don't want to say that I had gotten lazy, because I was always kind of lazy with studying at that point. But I gotten a little bit complacent. And part of that was just like, I was in a long-term relationship. I was focusing more on that. I was, I was hanging out with friends, and I don't know. I feel like I fell off a little bit. And then when I moved to Vancouver, lived with poker players. The only people I knew there were poker players. And, I was away from my family. I just played poker and studied poker. And so like my game progressed a lot in late 2011, 2012. And I think there was more to your question that I forgot.
Well, just based on the documentary, it sounded like, during this time, people were coming to you kind of as like somebody who, I don't know, just an authoritative figure who is knowledgeable and respected in these areas. So I don't know. I guess what did you tell people when they thought, is this the end of online poker? Where is the U.S. going to go from here?
It's funny because I remember Jason Koon talked about that in the documentary.
Yeah.
I remember I was sitting behind the camera when we were filming him. Usually I wasn't there for most interviews, but I was for that one. And I talked to him after, and I was like, I don't totally remember it that way. And so like my recollection is I was one of many poker players, and but I guess now in hindsight, that was a time I started a blog. I even had a couple like video vlogs, they're called. So like maybe I was putting myself out there more. Soon after that, I started Run It Once training. And so, yeah, in my memory, I was another poker player. But I think like sometime between then and now, my kind of position in the community shifted. It kind of, I don't know, like when you see the same person every day and they're growing up, you don't really notice day to day, but I don't know when it happened or how exactly, but if that's how he remembers it.
Yeah, that was interesting. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of it did have to do with you getting into poker coaching and launching a site. And that was another big focus of the documentary. So talk about that stage of your life, first launching the training site, and then also the struggles that you had with Run It Once Global and how that all panned out.
Yeah, so launching a training site was kind of easy. I had previously been working with another training site, and people loved learning from me. And so when I started the new site, a lot of people followed me there, and we took the approach of basically at the time there were a lot of things that went. There were a lot of ways in which we were lucky. So the one good thing we did. Two good things. The two good things we did is we kind of we looked at the poker training landscape, and it was kind of, there was a lot of good content out there, but it was kind of sloppy. So a lot of sites would, some would like 1 week they'd release 2 videos, another week they'd release 5, maybe average 2.5. And so like it would just be, you didn't know what to expect. A lot of the websites were poorly done. And so we invested a lot of money, not only in like the development of just a better actual platform, but we went out and hired a lot more coaches and better coaches and released 2 videos every single day. And I'm proud to say we've done that for 12 years, which is, if you have ever scheduled things with poker players, which I know you have, is no easy feat. Credit doesn't go to me. It's the team that does that. But yeah, it succeeded right away, and it felt like, oh, I guess we're good at business. But the things that were going well for us, kind of in the industry, is because of Black Friday, the competition, there were like a few, major competitors. They, at least a couple of them that come to mind, or a few actually, their model was more equity based. So they had like a lot of their top coaches had equity in the company, whereas we paid everybody per video. And a lot of those players that had equity in the company stopped playing poker Black Friday. Like some went back to school or got jobs. Some for other reasons had fallen off. Some focused more on the business side of their project and weren't playing. And so we came up at a time when a lot of them were kind of going down. And so there was, in what was a very saturated market, there all of a sudden was a gap right when we showed up. And, you know, on the opposite side of that, when we kind of set out to, I think it's true. Yeah. Like when we set out to launch Run-It-Once Poker, we saw a gap in the market, which was that players were kind of upset with specifically PokerStars when they were bought by Amaya, and the changes they were making, and they were kind of rallying. They wanted a poker site who listened to them and cared about them. And so we started building it, and then many years later we launched, and then that gap had kind of closed, and you know, it wasn't fresh off the heels of that anymore.
And I think in the documentary you said that you'd put like 10 million of your own money into this poker site. Is that right?
Yeah. So the short story is yes. We had done a couple other projects too that are included in that, but yeah, that's about what it ended up being. And yeah, I mean, I didn't get that back. I got some of it back. I didn't get a lot of it back.
Well, so yeah, if people want to learn more about that, they should watch the documentary. A very interesting story. But everything worked out because earlier this year, just a couple of weeks or months ago, BetRivers Poker launched in the U.S., which, as I understand it, it's Run-It-Once Poker, just under the BetRivers name. And so, yeah, talk about that site and kind of what you learned from the previous launch and where you expect this to go.
Yeah, so I can't remember my dates now. Basically, end of 2021, beginning of 2022, we sold Run-It-Once Poker to its Rush Street Interactive, RSI, who owns BetRivers, among other brands. But BetRivers is the major one in the U.S. And with the plan to relaunch it in the states that allow it. And, you know, we spent some time retooling the platform. They knew when they bought it that we'd have to kind of make it a more robust back end to handle kind of more scalability, and also we had to fit in with their system. And so they, in my opinion, got a good deal on it, knowing that they had to invest in growing it. And so, or in building it or rebuilding it. So for a while, it was just kind of working with them on the rebuild. And then finally we've launched in Pennsylvania. And it didn't take as long as it took the first time to launch, but it still was a while. And it's just fun to have it live again. And so I flew out to Philadelphia and played on there for a couple weeks and streamed. And like back when we started Run-It-Once Poker, it was a dream of mine to get it, like, succeed in the rest of the world market and then bring it to the US. And part of that dream was that more states would have legalized it by now, but I don't seem to have control over that. And so it didn't happen the way that I envisioned it, but it's still really cool to now be able to make an impact on the US market, the US poker market. And when we launched Run-It-Once Poker rest of world, our goal was to give people another option an option that, you know, as a business was more transparent and more connected to the community, listened to them, and actually not just listened to them, but explained, like engaged in a dialogue with them. There was a lot of kind of, you know, players saying, this isn't fair, this isn't right, why are you doing this? And then, you know, weeks later, a very generic PR statement. And that's kind of how it has to be at big companies. And I mean, to be fair, RSI is a big company. And so I can't speak as freely as I could when I was, you know, owner of the platform. But we still want to do that same thing in the US. And we're still committed to engaging in dialogue and listening to what players want and what players' concerns are, and really being another option. In the US market, there are not that many options. And so every additional option, I think, especially one like us who cares about, you know, poker as a profession, as well as cares about the experience of recreational players, because kind of it all works together. It's something that I'm proud of being part of.
You mentioned some of the concerns of players. Definitely something that's taken the spotlight in the last couple of years is things like bots and real-time assistance. And a lot of the bigger companies have had bot issues that they've had to, ban accounts or come out with statements or refund players money. What's your perspective on that and kind of the security of online poker in 2024?
It's a great question. And had you asked me 2 years ago, I would have said I'm very confident about the future of online poker, because real-time assistance bots have been around for like really, really long time. Probably, in some form, probably the entire time I've been playing, 20 years. Now, they were very kind of primitive at the beginning, but even 10 years ago, even 15 years ago, maybe, like computers could beat humans. And so it's been at least 10 years where there hasn't been that much growth from a kind of GTO perspective of what computers are capable of doing. Like they've been able to calculate near perfect play for a very long time. And so my thought was, as technology continues to advance, they can only advance so much in terms of how they play. Now, yes, they can gather a lot of data. This is why we have some policies at BetRivers Poker that prevents that. But they can gather a lot of data. They can start using exploitative strategies based on individual player stats and population tendencies and things like that. But realistically, like, they're not going to get better at poker. And I thought, on the other hand, technologically, sites use AI to detect bot behavior. And as that technology keeps progressing, detection is going to get easier and easier, while their play is not going to get better and better. And so I was super confident about it. Now I'm a little bit less sure, just because of kind of, over the last couple of years, just the kind of exponential growth in AI capabilities in general. And I expect that to continue. Not that I'm an expert in that, but I expect that to continue. And the biggest fear that I have is the detection will keep getting better. However, if it becomes like kind of swatting flies, because anybody, like, the technology is not there now, but 3 years from now, 5 years from now, could anybody just, spend $5 and get a bot that works really well, just because of how far AI gets advanced? And yes, they'll get caught and their money taken away. But if you have to keep doing it, can you keep up with it? And so that's my biggest fear. And we have, a number of our policies are kind of built to deter bots, as well as prevent things like HUD use and like building a database on individual players. You can't do that on BetRivers Poker. But I do think there's going to be a need for poker operators to continue thinking creatively about how to solve problems. And I think by far the biggest win for online poker would be probably would have to happen in the U.S. market, would be somebody cheating on a U.S. regulated site and getting legal consequences for it in the actual court system. Because right now, the only disincentive is the site can ban you and take your money if you hadn't withdrawn it yet. But it's not enough disincentive to kind of keep up with this problem. And, there's been talks of a player council and a blacklist, where if you get caught on this site, you're not allowed to play WSOP, you're not allowed to play this, you're not allowed to play this. And I think that's an improvement. That's a positive if done well. It's hard to do well. But I really would love to see something kind of enter the court system, because I think until we can really disincentivize, until somebody can really get punished seriously for what is essentially stealing, it's fraud. It is going to be a constant challenge.
That is interesting, and I'm trying to think if there's even a precedent for someone like facing legal consequences like that, because like you mentioned, it's so difficult to. So yeah, that is interesting, and that would be a a big precedent, probably.
Yeah. I mean, there was it is not at all the same thing. There was a court case against Phil Ivey. There was casinos against him. And the reason I bring that up is it's an example of my humble opinion. It was very unfair to him, the way it went down. And I think the reason for that, among others maybe, is that, most people don't understand gambling. And so whether it's a jury or a judge or regulators who are not, specifically gambling focused, I think there need to be laws surrounding it. And I think, it'd be great if they were consulting experts, because it's a hard thing for the average person to understand.
Yeah, definitely. So sticking with BetRivers, you mentioned that it launched in Pennsylvania, and also I know this just as someone who covers the U.S. online poker landscape. This stuff does move very slowly, and there's a lot of factors, whether a state is part of a multi-state agreement, and these things take very long. But what can you say about the future? Where do you expect to expand, and where do you think it'll be in a year or a couple of years from now?
Yeah, so we plan to continue to. This is where, as a larger company, I have guesses or knowledge and guesses of very specific things. But what I can say is that our aim is to expand to, as many regulated jurisdictions as are commercially viable, essentially. And so there are a number that we have our eye on specifically as a next step. I mean, we considered many before choosing Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania, I think, made a lot of sense because BetRivers had a big presence in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is not yet part of the MSIGA. And had we, let's say, launched in New Jersey, without also launching in all of the other states that share liquidity with New Jersey, we would have been at a really big disadvantage. And so, strategically, that's why we went with Pennsylvania first. And, not speaking for the company, but my hope is that we can kind of get into multiple of the shared liquidity states around the same time, so that because that liquidity is so important. And then as Pennsylvania is on its way to sharing liquidity, who knows when that's going to happen. But hopefully that dovetails nicely with that, and we can have a nice big player base.
Yeah, that's great. And so so in addition to this site and the poker training site, it seems like in recent years, maybe you've already been doing this, but you've gotten really into content creation, doing things like making YouTube videos where you break down big hands that you've played, or challenges against people, or memories against players. It's definitely interesting to see, as somebody who works in media, poker media specifically. But what inspired you to kind of become a creator like that?
It's funny. It was kind of a funny path. We were in these negotiations trying to sell Run It Once Poker, and we, as you saw the docuseries, I was very financially strained, and I was living here in Las Vegas, and so the combination of there's not that much for me to play. I'm extremely stressed from business, and my bankroll is not what it was, and so the combination of all those was there's not much for me to play. I can't play as big as I would like, and I probably shouldn't be playing big anyway because my mindset is not going to be great, given all these distractions. And so I just had the thought, if I'm not playing, what am I doing? So what can I do that's productive? And content had always been something that, I built up a following on Twitter just by, regular tweeting, as a regular person, because people knew me, playing poker, and, a small following on Instagram as well. And it just felt like, I've got this asset, which is, brand awareness in poker, and I'm not really utilizing it well or making the most of it. And so several times throughout the previous years, I had, had those thoughts man, I should be making more content. I should post more consistently or something like that. And sometimes I would post for 3 weeks at a time, kind of consistently, and then it would fall off because it was never really a priority. And so it was at this point that I was well, I don't really know what to focus on right now because we're trying to sell our business. It's super stressful. Then we did sell the business, but we're rebuilding. So there's not a lot for me to work on there right now. but it's still true that there are not a lot of games around here. It's still true that my bankroll is not what it was, and I'm less stressed than I was, but so yeah, I was just like, well, now's the time to really dedicate myself to this. If there's ever a time, now's the time. And so it started that way. And I made YouTube videos for a while without doing much on the other platforms at first. And then I focused for a few months on kind of creating everywhere. And with the exception of YouTube, where I had a team of 2 doing the editing and helping me with posting and stuff, I did it all myself. So like I was tweeting regularly and doing that myself. There wasn't that much on Instagram. But it was a lot of work. It ended up being full-time for me for a while. And I was like, things are growing. And I don't really know where this goes. Like, I don't know how I make this worth all the time that I'm spending and the money I'm spending on the team. But it just seems like there's got to be a way. So why don't I just keep growing? And then at the end of that, it was just so much of my time. I wanted my time back. And so I said, okay, well, I want to keep doing this. I need to hire more of a team. And so I built out the team. And slowly but surely went from, YouTube to some stuff on Instagram, the newsletter, which is kind of the biggest new thing over the last year and a half, or I can't even remember now, and start like, let's just build this up. And so, yeah, that became a focus. And really, even still to this day, it's been, I don't know how many years, 3 years or something. Like it's still like not really profitable. Well, it's not profitable, but it's growing, and I just feel like it makes sense somehow.
Well, especially hearing that it's not profitable, I can tell you as the poker community, we're grateful for it.
Thank you.
Maybe it was my boss, Chad Holloway, who said that when Phil Galfond says something, we listen. But you're definitely, very articulate, and it's great to hear your thoughts, and those newsletters are great. So people should definitely check those out. The consistency certainly stands out, because I know even me, I think of projects that I want to do, but you're motivated for, like you said, a couple of weeks. And so I don't know, how do you not get unmotivated over those long periods?
So I do get unmotivated. The way to stay consistent is to have a team that's like doing a lot of it for you and pushing you to do it. Mm-hmm. That said, like in the last 6 months, the consistency has fallen off, both in the newsletter and YouTube, specifically because I launched a new coaching program, and it was just so time and resource intensive that I just said, hey guys, stop doing that other stuff. I need your help here. But like now we're finally like getting it back in gear. And so the consistency will be there in 2025.
That's great. Well, we'll look forward to that. Okay, there are a couple, I see these as career highlights for you, just a few moments in your career that I want to ask you about. The first time that I remember seeing you in poker was on the big game. You probably played in some other televised games as well, but that's the one that sticks out to me. So that's obviously a very iconic show. Do you have any memories playing with people like Doyle Brunson or Phil Ivey, or heavy hitters like that?
You know what's weird? For some reason, that's one of the shows that I remember the least. So every time I played on high stakes poker, it was very memorable to me. I played on the big game. I want to say I only went there once, but I mean, they filmed multiple, shows during that time, and it somehow just all blended together for me. But I playing with, whether it's there or at WSOP or in live cash games, this is a tangent, but in 16, 17, I regularly played in a cash game with Doyle Brunson here, and it was just super cool to be playing with him, multiple days a week, and get to witness him in his element that regularly.
Yeah, that's super fun. Last year, I think it was, I wrote kind of a memorial story about Doyle Brunson and talked to many players who had memories with him. So I'm sad I didn't get to talk to you, but cool to hear that you got to play with him a decent amount.
Yeah, he really impressed me. I mean, like, obviously, I mean, he's impressed everybody from afar, but seeing him in person, the game that we were playing, it was a 100K buy-in mixed game, but all the games were big bet, so no limit and pot limit, and it was 12 games, random games most people had never played, and the we had like a group of regulars that played, but people would come in, and there were a lot of pros that came from like the Bobby's Room game where they mostly played limit and tried to play in that game and lost usually. And it was interesting because like the only pros at the time that were beating that game were under 40. And so, like the guys in their 40s and 50s would come in, like they didn't do well generally. And then Doyle came in his 80s and did well in the game. And so to me, it just spoke volumes. And I remember I was thinking about it after we played, several times, and I finally asked him, I just said, Doyle, when you were, my age, were you miles ahead of everybody? And he answered very modestly, but I mean, the answer was yes. He said, you have to understand, Phil, when I started playing poker in those days, I was the only college educated person playing poker. And so yeah, I had an advantage, but yeah, I just think for him to be able to do that in his 80s, just like, wow, I can't imagine him in his 30s against the competition back then.
Yeah, the longevity is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So the other career moment that I wanted to ask you about was the Galfond challenge, specifically the one that everyone remembers against VeniVidi, which has to be one of the greatest poker comebacks in history. It's funny because, that COVID period, that's when I first started getting into poker. So I remember in real time watching that match being commentated by David Tuckman, Joe Stapleton. And yeah, it was crazy. And from talking to Farah, it sounds like it was, a pretty emotional time for you. So let's talk about that challenge specifically. And yeah, how did it feel to come out of that hole?
It was an intense challenge, as you spoke about with Farah. That challenge was about a lot more than just the money involved in the challenge, and whether I won or not. It was it had been many years since I competed like in high stakes online games. Like I would dabble because like at that point we had moved to Vegas. I would dabble sometimes when I would be on a trip and like record my screen so that I had content for run at once videos and things like that. But it had been a long time since I was playing in the high stakes online games and winning regularly. I don't mean winning regularly, playing regularly and winning overall in the long run. And between those times, PLO solvers became, more and more used. And I was very fearful about my future in poker because I had never been a good student. I didn't have a particularly good memory. And I thought that, in the post-solver era of poker, the best players are going to be the ones who are good studiers, and that's not me. And so, in a way, I mean, I sometimes wonder if getting into all these other business ventures was my way of maybe protecting myself from finding out that I couldn't hack it anymore at high stakes. And so, even though I didn't really fully admit it to myself, I was definitely worried that that the writing was on the wall, that me as a high stakes winner was coming to an end. And so the Galfond challenge was about me testing myself in the post solver era and seeing if I still could hack it. And so obviously, I did study and I came into the match with some confidence, but of course, when you lose 45 buy-ins straight in the first match you play since all those years off, you start to, go back to those stories. Okay, maybe in this post-solver era, it's not my game anymore. And so that was, it was depressing. It was, in part it was hard because it was on a very public stage. It was my comeback. But really it was more internally believing, well, it was about my internal belief about whether or not I was good enough at poker anymore in the post-solver era. And I was certainly questioning it again and again during that match. And so there was a point where I took a break. I was going to decide if I was going to continue. And at that point, I played on in some other games. I played on Stars, Heads Up Zoom, and I was playing against a lot of different opponents who were also good, and I was doing well. I mean, it was variance in both spots, but I was doing well, and I felt like I understood. I felt like I was getting it. And so I was like, and I want to continue, and I just want to prove to myself that I can hang and win against this guy. I didn't ever imagine coming all the way back. I just wanted to, I was down 900,000. I wanted to win 200,000 back, which, if we played, I don't know how many hands were left, 13,000 hands, and I won over 13,000 hands. Even if I lost overall in the match, that would show me that I could hang. And then, of course, you couldn't have written it better the way that the comeback happened. Just as poorly as I ran at the beginning, I ran that hot at the end. And yeah, it was just like the perfect fairy tale graph.
So it sounds like you attribute that kind of to just the variance working itself out and not, you got some read on VeniVidi halfway through.
I do think something clicked for me, but, it wasn't something clicked for me where I went from conscious competence, where I was like actively thinking about how a solver would play a certain spot. And it took so much brain power to try to remember the things that I was learning and the concepts that I was pulling from solvers for the first time and applying them in game when decisions were coming at me, every few seconds. And at some point, those things became more automatic. They clicked. And then all of a sudden I had bandwidth for really my true skills as a poker player, which are hand reading, situation reading, and opponent reading, which was kind of walled off from when I had to use all my brain power to figure out what I thought was, theoretically optimal, or what my game plan said to do in a certain spot. And so there's definitely something that clicked. And I think, could it have taken my win rate from -7 big blinds to +7 big blinds? Yes. But it didn't take it from, -25 to +25, or whatever the actual, win rates were.
So how about the very last few hands of that match? Because it came down to a strategic thing where once you realize that you're able to time bank out and sit out for the rest of the match and just blind down, you'll still come out ahead after 25,000 hands. So what sort of calculations were you making? And I don't know, were you trying to inflate certain pots or keep certain pots small, or I don't know, what was the strategy there?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of thinking went into it. I had a spreadsheet. I had done a lot of math prior, and it's actually really interesting. Probably most people watching weren't paying close attention and weren't actively thinking about what the strategy would be. But for those who were at the time, you don't want to fold to victory nearly as early as you would think, because the amount you would give up in blinds in order to fold all those hands out and secure the win, you'd be giving up so much more EV in blinds than you would in risking losing the bet and playing your normal way. So first I figured out I essentially had a spreadsheet of, how many hands left, how much are you up, or how much you see up, and should you fold out. And it was very stressful because, I don't know what data VeniVidi has, but I do know that, I'm looking at the numbers from his end because he was leading most of that day. And there were several times where, we're playing 100, 200, 20K stacks. There were several times where if he won 2,000, he could fold out and win. So there were several times where if he won the pot, it was over, multiple times. And that only happened once for me. And then I did win the pot. So yes, I was pushing the action really hard because there were so many spots where it's okay, if I'm going to see the turn, if I lose this hand, then I'm out. So I might as well make the pot. If I'm going to see the turn, let's make the pot huge so that if I win it, then like I can actually win in this individual hand. So there was a period where he was trying to play very low variance, and I was just potting every flop that I wanted to play. And it can play to your advantage when you're the one trying to push the action, and they have to be very careful. But yeah, then it flipped, and I had the lead, and I had to be careful. And yeah, so it was a very weird form of poker, extremely weird. Like it's something like tournament poker and ICM, but it's just the first time I'd ever done something like that. Obviously, the first time he had too. But yeah, I mean, in the end, it was just a wild day. Like, it's funny too. I mean, I recorded my screen, like I have all of the hands, and I went back later and watched them thinking it would be super interesting, but without the context, it wasn't. But I just know in the moment with all the context, and I always knew, okay, if I lose 3,000 more here, I'm out. Okay, if I win 2,500, I win. Yeah, it was really, I would say fun. It was really interesting. It wasn't fun because it was so stressful.
Yeah, well, it did end up having that fairy tale ending.
It did.
And you're obviously very busy with BetRivers launching and all that, but any chances for any other Galfond challenges in the future?
I want there to be. The challenge of the Galfond challenge is that I'm pretty settled here now. When I played those Galfond challenges, I was already a father. My son was 1. And we kind of, we flew him up to Vancouver, where I played online for several of these matches. And I played a couple from the US here on WSOP.com. The matches take so long. I'm not really, like, my son's in school. We have more of a structure now than we did. And so I'm not looking to go spend 3 months elsewhere. And so for a challenge to make sense, I want to be able to do it here online. And I would love for BetRivers to come to Nevada and to be able to play, a match from here against somebody else in the state or in New Jersey or Michigan or whatever the case may be. But right now, yeah, a lot of the players that would like to play me are outside of the U.S. So I don't foresee it happening in the very near future, but I'd like to do it. And to be honest, I would love to relearn No-Limit Hold'em and play a No-Limit Hold'em challenge. That would be like to play another PLO challenge. It'd be fun. It's fun to play, but it's not as exciting to me. It's not like I want to do something new.
No Limit Hold'em would be cool. Hopefully BetRivers comes here and we can see something happen. You mentioned your schedule and how you may not have time for something like that. And we talked about your marriage with Farah. It's interesting because in the last couple of years, it's kind of swapped where now she's the one who's out playing these high stakes poker games. And you're not out playing live poker as much as she is. Talk about kind of her trajectory, because yeah, she's gone from just playing regular cash games to moving up to the nosebleed stakes, those private games at Bobby's Room and things like that. And then with your son getting a little bit older, she transitioned more to poker tournaments. So talk about her journey and where she's at right now.
I mean, she's had a really interesting one where, when we met, she played recreationally, and then slowly over time, she started playing, I would call it professionally at the low stakes live games. So like at 2-5, low mid stakes. And then she was winning at 2-5 for a while. She played 5-10. She did the whole step back down to 2-5, go up to 5-10, and then she was winning there. And really, her trajectory like flipped one night when Andrew, who was part of the game in Ivey's room, asked me if she wanted a seat. And so that's, 510 to 300, 600, which is quite a big jump. And, the game in there was softer than the 510 game. So I talked to her and made sure she was cool with it and then said, yeah. And so then she made the jump from 510 to 300, 600 and played that for a long time and really and did well in there. And then that game kind of fizzled out kind of soon after we became parents. And she took a lot of time off. And I think it's been hard for her to find her way back, because like you said, she's been playing tournaments because you can play tournaments whenever you want. I mean, there's a schedule, but you pick which tournaments to play. I mean, there are a whole host of reasons that she chose tournaments, but I think that I think she was really in her element in those private, semi-private, private nosebleed cash games, and it was just a great opportunity. And they kind of she doesn't have that opportunity anymore, and also she doesn't have the sleep schedule that she had back then, and so she's enjoying tournaments. But I don't know, it's not, I mean, I shouldn't speak for, I think it's not perfect. I think she's a high stakes cash game player who doesn't have the opportunity that she used to, at least for now.
Yeah, I know when I talked to her, she said that she feels a lot of mom guilt when she plays cash, because whereas when you're in a tournament, you're kind of forced to stay there until you run out of chips. But your son is getting older now, so maybe we'll see her back in the high stakes cash games.
Yeah, it is. Like, he's at the age now where it's a lot easier to do things, and especially for her. Like you said, she felt a lot of guilt leaving, and I think most of it self-imposed, and sometimes like exaggerated guilt when she would go and be like, why I should be home with my son. Why am I playing poker right now? And at the beginning, she wasn't really comfortable unless she was with him or I was with him. Like, and so I think that as he's gotten older, and I think she's a lot more comfortable. Whether it's, we're actually about to take our first trip together alone for like the first time since, 6 years. So that's a milestone. So yeah, I think and hope that the opportunities open up and she finds like exactly what she wants to do. But yeah, she does love tournaments. She's made some good friends that kind of play all the tournaments with her here. And, so she's enjoying that too. But, I don't know. I've always been rooting for her to play cash games.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we see more of both of you out there. Well, thank you, Phil. This has been fun. I just have a couple kind of general questions that I like to wrap up with. And the first one is, what is a book that you would recommend? Doesn't have to be a poker book, but could be.
Oh, man. That's hard. There's a book I read recently that was valuable to me, called Crucial Conversations. It has nothing to do with poker. It's just about having tough conversations and doing it well, not shying away from having those talks that we know we should and end up not doing it. So that's what comes to mind. I don't know how many poker players is going to help that.
That sounds like a good one.
Yeah.
And we talked about a lot of different aspects of your career, bounce back moments you had. But with all that in mind, what's a piece of advice that you'd give to your younger self?
I'm trying to think of a piece of advice that I that I didn't follow. Because the first thing that came to mind was kind of just, follow your passion. But I did that. I always did that. Maybe a little too much. So, think big picture, think long term. I historically was very focused on the here and now and the next opportunity, without really a long-term plan or vision for where I was going. And I think when you do that, at least for me, and a lot of people, when you do that, you can kind of spend time and energy in areas that don't really amount to much.
Yeah. Well, thinking long-term really ties in nicely to the last question, which is, what is your favorite life lesson that can be drawn from poker? There's so many metaphors and different ways it applies to life, but yeah, what's your favorite life lesson?
It's a great question. I think I've had the most, as I mentioned earlier, the most growth that I've had in my poker career was working with other players. So studying with others who are passionate about learning the same thing. And I think that you can do that in every avenue of life, whether it's work, whether you want to, become a hiker, whether you want to become a better father. Like just, I think it's, with all the books and I mean, I'm thinking poker, but like books and courses and anything else, ways that you can get an education, all the tools out there. There's so many things to learn from, and I think that the one that's often undervalued is just peers.
That's a great one. And I think poker players especially, it can be an isolating game. So that's great advice for sure. Well, Phil, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for having us in your home. I enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you.